All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for a conversation on race. This conversation is going to be based on the experiences of a couple of scholars who attended the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity. But before we do that, I'm going to introduce myself. So you might see the name Brandon Brown on the screen, but I'm not Brandon Brown. I'm Joakina Stone. I'm a relationship manager for the Gates Millennium Scholars Program, and I was one of the staff members who helped to bring scholars to this conference. A little bit about me: I was born in Louisiana, raised in DC for 10 years, then raised in Portland, Oregon. I got my undergraduate degree in speech communications from Oregon State University. I got my master's from University of Maryland in student affairs, college student personnel, and I will be going back to school in the fall for my doctorate in higher education and student affairs. And I've been with the Gates family, for the past 2 years. So I'm going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right in.
Good afternoon. My name is Vincent Jones. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm of the Gates Millennium Scholars cohort of 2008. I did my undergraduate work at Middlebury College in Vermont, where I majored in sociology, anthropology, with minors in music and gender studies. I then went on to attain a master's degree in sociology and education with an education policy focus at Teachers College, Columbia University in New York. And after a stint at a New England boarding school, I have returned to Teachers College for my doctorate in health and behavior studies, where I will be. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Charmaine Scarlett. I'm a rising senior at Temple University. My major is public health. I was born in DC, but I was raised in Maryland.
Okay, I'm going to pause for a quick second. Sorry for interrupting, Charmaine. I just want to check and make sure we are live on Facebook. I don't see us. Do you all see us on Facebook?
I don't
No?
see it. I don't see it.
Come on.
I'm looking at the Gates page and I don't see it.
I don't see any participants.
I don't either. Okay, here we go. Now we got to do all that over, y'all.
Oh, good. I need a redo.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Joakina Stone. I'm with the Gates Millennium Scholars Program. You may see on the screen that it says Brandon Brown, but I'm not Brandon Brown. This conversation is a conversation on race. It's one of the things that, people talk about at home, maybe with their close friends, but there's never a lot of open dialogue, or quite often there's not a lot of open dialogue. And so we wanted the opportunity for scholars who attended the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in Higher Education, NCORE for short, to have an opportunity to talk about race in America, but also talk about their experience at that conference. So I'm going to do a little bit more information about me, and then I'm going to allow the scholars to introduce themselves. So again, like I said, I'm not Brandon Brown. I'm Joakina Stone. I'm a relationship manager with the Gates Millennium Scholars Program, been there for 2 years. Prior to that, I worked at Howard University. I am from Oregon, Louisiana, and DC. I went to school at Oregon State University, where I got my bachelor's in speech communication. I got a master's from University of Maryland in college student personnel, student affairs, and I will be returning to school this fall for a doctorate degree in higher education student affairs. Now I'm going to turn it over to Vincent so he can introduce himself, and then we'll allow Charmaine to introduce herself.
Greetings. Thank you for having me. My name is Vincent Jones. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I attended undergrad at Middlebury College in Vermont, where I majored in sociology, anthropology, with minors in gender studies and music. I then went on to Teachers College, Columbia University, where I attained a master's degree in sociology of education with an emphasis on education policy. After a 2-year stint at a New England boarding school, I returned to Teachers College where I'm pursuing my doctorate in health and behavior studies. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Charmaine Scarlett. I'm a rising senior at Temple University, majoring in public health. I'm originally from DC, but I was raised in Maryland.
Cool. So we are going to jump in. I see that we have one attendee. Hey. The great thing is that this broadcast will be recorded, and because I'm technologically challenged, I don't think we're actually on Facebook Live right now, and that's okay. Because we are going to record this and we'll post the link on our Facebook page once that is available. So just wanted to put that out there because this is our second do-over and I don't want to start over again. So we'll jump in there. So what made you all apply to NCORE? Let's start there.
Well, I applied to NCORE because I attended a Gates event in Philadelphia, and I heard from other scholars how they attended other Gates-funded conferences and how the conferences not only changed their lives, but they were able to connect with other scholars, and just being able to build relationships really impacted them in a positive way. So me personally, I went ahead and applied to attend the conference, and it was one of the best decisions that I made.
Thank you. Well, I applied to NCORE because I wanted to build upon my understanding of race and ethnicity that I developed through my academics in the social sciences and my early career professional experiences at the aforementioned boarding school in Connecticut. I've had the privilege of living in total immersion work and academic environments throughout my entire education and professional career. However, this is both a blessing and a curse because they're very insular environments. So I wanted to go to NCORE so that I could have discussions about race and ethnicity among people of more diverse backgrounds and professional experiences.
Cool, thanks for both of those responses. For our audience members out there, so you may not have attended NCORE, you may not be familiar with it. So like I said, it's the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity. And like Vincent said, it's a space where we can have conversations about racial identity, but also other identities as well. I recognize that, our identities are intersectional. We're not just a race, we're gender, we're our sexuality, we're our ability, we're our religion, we're all these different things. And so I don't want anyone to feel like they can't show up with all their identities. We're just focusing on race because that was the theme of the conference. It's the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity. But even in that space, they talked about various identities and how they intersect. So I just want to throw that out there for anyone who's not familiar with the conference or might be curious as to why we're, only focusing on race. The other thing that I want to say before we jump into some more questions is that the panelists are going to use I statements. And the reason for that is so that they can represent their own experiences and not the experiences of, people that they met at NCORE or, groups of people that they can identify with. So they're going to use I statements to reflect on their personal experiences. And then our comments represent our own thoughts, our own feelings. And, we encourage you to ask us questions. If you're in here, there's a question and answer section. So with technology, I wasn't able to do the Facebook Live. But ask us questions and we'll try to represent, our experiences from NCORE as best as possible. And I'm a moderator, so I might chime in every so often to talk about my experience, but I really wanted to allow this platform for the scholars to reflect on their experience. So getting back to the discussion question. So I know you all had goals and reasons as to why you applied to NCORE. Once you got there, what was the most impactful experience at NCORE? It can be, workshop you attended, a conversation you had, whatever that looked like for you. And it could be positive or not so positive. So I'll go to Vincent first.
Well, I have two experiences that I would like to share if we have the time. Well, the most impactful part of the NCORE conference for me was networking with faculty and administrators from all around the country towards employment. I'm going to be graduating soon within the next couple of years, which means that I'm going to be hitting the job market in the near future. To this end, everyone that I spoke with represented new possibilities for me. My daily interactions helped me to imagine myself in new places and in roles that I didn't even know existed. It reminded me of when I studied abroad and traveled extensively as an undergraduate. Each day I would awaken not knowing what sight I would experience, and that's how I felt at NCORE. I felt alive. Also, the keynote speakers were phenomenal. Each of them left me inspired with a higher sense of self efficacy and confidence. Dr. Juliet V Garcia left a considerable impression upon me. She was named the first female Mexican American president of a U.S. college or university in 1986. Dr. Garcia's presidency spanned 28 years, and she used an analogy, a biblical analogy, to remind us of the strength that we have, even if we come from backgrounds that are very humble. So she told us about how her mother died at the age of 40. She was the only Latina in her high school and her seniors honors classes. Um, Her father raised her brothers, aged 11, 9, and 6 at the time of her mother's death. And the day that she died changed her life tremendously. And one day her father brought them all into the living room and asked, did you go to school today? And yes, they replied. And he says, you're survivors. You've survived the worst things that could have happened to you as a child. You've already experienced and persevered through these challenges, and nothing that will ever happen to you in the future will be harder than what you've already experienced. So she equated this to the story of David and Goliath. And she reminded us of the advantages that Goliath had being a giant. However, David, through perseverance, was able to defeat Goliath. And she reminded us that we are all Davids in many senses. Even though we may come from humble backgrounds, that just makes us stronger. It makes us hungrier. And even when we start with very little, there's always room for improvement. And that just left me feeling really invigorated. And there were about 3 or 4 keynote speakers that left me with similar feelings. And those are 2 of many reasons why I really loved the NCORE conference.
Thanks, Vincent. Thank you. That was I remember that story. And I remember from Julia Garcia, I think, is that her name? But I remember that story. I remember her keynote, and it was very moving. So thank you for sharing that with everyone. Charmaine, how about you?
The most impactful part of my NCORE experience was a workshop I attended. It was called Self-Care in a Time of Chaos, a Critical Practice for Success. And this workshop was hosted by Jamie Washington. And I came into the workshop thinking that it was going to be a PowerPoint presentation. However, we were really active in noticing how we don't take time to care for ourselves. And during the session, not only what he presented let me know that it is important to focus on self-care no matter the environment that you're in, but it also let me know that people around me, no matter how different we are, no matter if it's age, education, or race, we all have the same issues. During the workshop, I sat in a group of 4 women, and we were all different in many ways. And it just surprised me because I was the youngest. And even though I was the youngest, we all had similar experiences with not practicing self-care and seeing what not practicing self-care can not only do to your body, but your mental state and your emotional state. And it was really impactful, not only because we came to the realization that self-care was important, but I built lasting bonds with each and every woman that I encountered during the workshop, and that really helped me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think self-care, unfortunately, for many communities of color, is an area that we don't tend to focus on. So Charmaine, can you share a few tips that they might have discussed during that session about how to effectively practice self-care. In a day and age with technology and Facebook and Instagram, and people are posting videos every other day of Black bodies being killed, or the government trying to take over Native American lands. How do we keep ourselves sane and safe? What are some of the tips that they shared?
Well, one important thing I would first start off with is just take the time to breathe. If you're ever in a situation where you feel like it's too much going on, it's too much in your space, always take the time to breathe and reflect on the situation. Not everything requires any type of backlash, or it requires you to respond in any certain way. If you don't feel comfortable, it's okay to step away, breathe, and remove yourself from a situation. Another thing that was important was to realize that as people, it is okay to protect our energy and protect our space. If something is happening on social media that you personally don't like or you don't condone, it is okay to disconnect off of Facebook or Instagram or any platform that you feel like could be detrimental to your energy or your well-being. It's okay to disconnect at any time and to handle self-care. Also, something else that was really important was to notice changes within your body. If you know that you're not feeling well, or if you know that you're physically starting to slow down, those are the signs of fatigue, and you need to take time away either to sleep or to breathe or to meditate. Just take time to care for yourself. So breathing, protecting your energy, and protecting your physical capabilities by just knowing yourself. You know what you can handle. So don't push yourself beyond those limits.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's important for everyone to hear, including myself. That's part of the reason why I'm not on Facebook, because I had to practice self-care. So I deactivated my account because it was just a little bit too much going on. So it's good to hear that, that's affirmed. Going to move on to the next question. So what are some of the issues that students of color face in higher education? You can speak from personal experience or from what you learned at the conference. And if you can also share, what are some of the tips to manage some of those issues?
Well, one of the issues that we spoke about at the conference was confronting racial biases from professors and peers. Oftentimes, students of color will enter predominantly white institutions and colleges and universities where people have preconceived notions about who they are and what they represent, and we all have our own biases, yes. But at the same time, it seems like an uphill battle for students of color many times when they are confronting the controlling images of who they are in the media that people who may or may not have grown up with people like them prior to college have internalized. And it can wear students down. Low expectations from professors and peers. If a student joins a group project, for example, a student of color, it might be possible that they may think that their peers think that they are less capable, and the perception of racism has deleterious effects upon students of color. So it's important that measures are taken, such as self-care measures and building up resiliency, communication skills, and self-efficacies to be able to withstand the crippling, and ever-present effects of racism. That's one point.
Another issue.
Oh, we can't hear you, Charmaine.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Another issue facing people of color in higher education was just feeling like they did not have a voice. And that was really important because it impacted the way that students participated on their campus or just leadership positions that they sought at their university. So I attended the Student Leadership Development Conference, the Pre-Conference Institute. And through that conference, we had different workshops where students learned how to converse with leaders at their institutions, or say if they had any problems or disagreements with professors or other people that have positions in higher educations. We were given the tools to know how to efficiently communicate with them, so that if there is an issue, that we can come to some type of common understanding and make progress.
You are muted. We can't hear you, Joakina.
I keep forgetting to unmute myself. Thank you. So thank you for sharing both of those statements, Charmaine and Vincent. I think when I think about what I know about what students of color experience on college campus, students at predominantly white institutions specifically, there's the idea of stereotype threat. And so, Vincent, you talked a little bit about class projects and how students feeling or other white students feeling like the students of color aren't intelligent or competent enough to contribute to the group. And there's some research out there about stereotype threat and imposter syndrome that says that we internalize some of these things and we feel like we're not adequately equipped to be able to contribute intellectually or academically. And so I think, unfortunately, that is a reality of some students of color at predominantly white campuses, that they do have that fear that they're not good enough, or they don't belong, or they don't have the skills or the knowledge. And I know oftentimes when speaking to Gates scholars, specifically Gates scholars, people feel like, oh, well, you have it easy because you got here on a scholarship. And so I think that I say all that to say that it's important to recognize those feelings and to know that you are worthy, you are skilled, you are educated, you're just as intelligent as your peers. And unfortunately, on predominantly white campuses, I think that sometimes students experience that. I think that students experience that outside of PWIs as well, but I say PWI specifically because I think it, HBCUs and our HSIs and other minority serving institutions, because the racial barrier is not there, some of that stereotype threat or imposter syndrome is not as prevalent. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. Any comments or responses to that?
I do have a comment in response to that. At the conference, I was also able to present on a panel as a guest of 3 about how to survive and thrive at a predominantly white institution as a student of color. And one of the points that was made on the panel was that undergraduates in particular need to be aware of the fact that they do have a voice. I think that sometimes students of color, first generation college students per se, may internalize a sense of helplessness, or that they don't have a voice and that there's no one to listen to them. However, the colleges, that couldn't be any further from the truth in many instances, because colleges and universities need to make sure that they are not only admitting students from diverse backgrounds, but that the students are graduating and that they are happy and having great experiences on campuses as well. So if something is going awry for students, I think that they need to be reminded that there are faculty and staff that are standing by to assist them with whatever they're going through. And we should use, just as colleges and universities use African American and bodies of color on brochures and to make themselves look good, that there's a two-way part of that transaction. The students themselves need to be happy, and we need to empower students to speak up about their situations, and also to be mindful of what they're going through themselves.
Joakina, you're muted.
Thanks, guys. But Vincent, that brings me to another question. You talked about, utilizing faculty and staff on campus and other, campus partners. What does allyship look like? How do we build allies as students of color, as people of color, whether it's on a college campus or, maybe we've graduated and we're in the working world now. What does allyship look like amongst communities of color, and how do we forge those relationships?
Well, I think that the most important aspect of being an ally of any underrepresented group is developing a sense of cultural competency. Now, cultural competency has many definitions, but it entails being aware of your own biases that you are bringing to day-to-day situations. It's not something that you can go to a diversity workshop and acquire, but instead it is an ongoing and cyclical process of self-analysis. There may have been conversations at the dinner table growing up where we've developed prejudices about other people or even our own people that we're bringing into our micro interactions with those that we are trying to be allies with and trying to support. So whenever it involves having a sense of mindfulness of where these biases may lie so that we're not perpetuating um, hurt and harm in our efforts to be allies.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that is very accurate. The only other thing that I would add is, being sure, so you said making sure that we are culturally competent and understanding our own biases. I think sometimes, unfortunately, as communities of color, we may play the oppression Olympics. Like, oh, well, I'm a Black woman, so I got it worse than, Asian men because that's the quote unquote model minority. And so just making sure that we're not doing that and working in collaboration with one another, because, people don't know my struggle as a Black woman, just like I don't know somebody else's struggle as a Native American female or, insert whatever identities here. And so being mindful that, not to pit ourselves, because what oppression does is pits groups that are oppressed against each other. And so making sure that we are, mindful of that in a way that we can work together, even though we might have different struggles. So, yeah, thank you, Vincent. Charmaine, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I agree with both of you all. I agree that those different factors are really important, but I also think that self-efficacy and accountability is really important to forming these relationships. And I think in order to make a difference or impact to social change, we need to hold ourselves accountable and share our story, but also knowing that we're sharing our story, don't use it as a form of oppression, as we just talked about, but use it to build each other up and use it as a network and build a network, knowing that what we've been through, you may not know what someone else is going through and they may have that same experience. So just hold yourself accountable with whatever you experience in life and use that experience to help other people through.
Thank you.
We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now? I'm just going to not mute my computer anymore because clearly my short-term memory does not work well, so I can't remember to unmute myself. So I want to talk a little bit about the current socio-political climate. There has, with the new president, with 45th in office, there has been an increase in hate crimes across the country. Just recently, which is close to home to me, at the campus of University of Maryland, a young African-American man who was from Bowie State University was killed on campus. And it is suspected, probably is, a hate crime. And so with events like these popping up more often, how do we as college students start to have some real, and I'm not a college student, but how do we as Gates scholars or college students or professionals or whatever, wherever we are in our life, how do we have some real conversations about race in an authentic way? Because I think that, even with, there was another incident in Virginia, I think, where a young Muslim Black woman was killed, and they are not charging the suspect with a hate crime. They're saying that, I don't know, I forget what they're saying, but they're not calling it a hate crime. And so, how do we have some real conversations about race in a way that, is authentic, but also holds people accountable? What do you all think that looks like?
Well, me personally, I think that talking about race is always a touchy subject. Um, Sometimes people will say that they don't see race or they don't see color, and this type of society, it's no way that you can't. I think what is really important to having an honest conversation is like I said at first, is self-care is always important because you can't pour from an empty cup. So make sure that if you're going to have an honest conversation, make sure that you're in a place to do so. Not only that, you also have to come into the conversation that people may have different views from you. So if someone does have a different view, just respect it, and respect them as well, and be able to speak your mind. I feel like, and I agree with you, Joakina. I've seen something on the news in Maryland about a road rage incident where like an 18-year-old was killed by a white man, and it also happened not too far from you. And I was just shocked by how just the value is just placed on African American lives is just so different, or just people of color. So I just think that in order to have an honest conversation about race, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Know where you stand and do your research.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, there are two things I'd like to say regarding this issue. And the first is that we must stay awake and vigilant. We must watch the news and just be aware of what's going on, because now is not the time to tune out. And then a lot of times we will see news reports and there will be questions about whether the incidences are racially inspired or not. And even though evidence may point to that, it's not definite. But at the same time, there are a lot of there's a lot of factual knowledge, numerical knowledge, and about racial and health disparities that are just irrefutable. I was reading an article the other day, and it took about 40 years for the life expectancy for an African American female to reach parity with that of a white female. And I think that happened in around 1994. And there are just a slew of health disparities leading up to that. There was an article called Excess Mortality in Harlem by Dr. Robert Fullilove. And I believe it's either in the 1970s or in the 1980s, the life expectancy of an African American male was less than that of someone in a war-torn nation in Baghdad, I believe. And so, and African American women are 6 times more likely to die of breast cancer, even though they are less likely to contract it than white females. So when we have these facts in mind at the forefront, there's no way that we can deny that there is a racialized and a socioeconomic component to health disparities and educational inequality and the violence that we are seeing being perpetuated throughout the land. So we just need to rely on data-driven um, information to inform uh, our day-to-day lives and our conversations about race and ethnicity, because I think it's very easy for us as people of color in this well, actually, I'll just speak for myself. It's very easy for me to say that racism exists, but I've had a very specific experience as a person of color. But when I bring facts and figures into it, it just bolsters the case in so many ways. So I think, again, we need to stay awake, and we also need to stay numerical.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to kind of shift just a little bit. I think oftentimes, so when I was at NCORE, I was at one of the pre-conference sessions, and the name of the session is escaping me at the moment. But one of the points that one of the participants made is that oftentimes when people of color talk about their first racial experience, it involves trauma. It's, oh, I realized that, I was African American when someone called me the N-word, or when someone didn't want to sit next to me in class. And I thought about that, like, wow, we don't really when we think about our racial identity, it often starts from a place of trauma. So the question that I want to ask to kind of shift the negativity that is sometimes associated with racial experiences, how can we, as people, do a better job of celebrating our own identities? What does celebrating Blackness look like? What does celebrating Asian identity, Latino American, like what does celebrating our identity look like? I know that there's a couple of colleagues and I were talking about, Black Girls Rock and Black Girl Magic and, Black Boy Joy. I think those are some like great hashtags, but what are some other ways that we can really celebrate all of our identities and embrace them and feel empowered?
Well, I believe that we shouldn't forget to celebrate our lives. Even though there is a lot of turmoil going on around us, it's important for us to think about things that are positive, and to draw on that inner strength that we have, remembering that so many people before us have overcome obstacles to bring us to this point. And when we remember the past, we can commemorate the future and celebrate the present as well, and build upon the resiliencies of those who have come before us. And we have to remind ourselves not to get caught up in the strife that is abounding around us, and to go back to the point earlier of self-care, to ensure that we can be our best selves in order to withstand what's going on around us, and to be, our best selves.
I agree with Vincent. I also realize that sometimes we use those hashtags so frequently that we forget what Black Girl Magic looks like, or Black Boy Joy may look like. And I had experience at the conference where an attending asked me, "What is Black Girl Magic? Like, how do you even put that into words, or how would you define it?" And from that experience, I would just say celebrating who you are and what you accomplished as a person, as a human being. Celebrate what you've been through, celebrating your heritage. It's no way that you can put a hashtag on your identity, but you can tell your story. And telling your story, knowing that someone may look different than you, but you all may have the same experiences, you realize, okay, well, maybe we do have a lot in common. And maybe this Black Girl Magic isn't just only Black Girl Magic. It's the magic of what a woman is and what we can accomplish when we work together, or the magic of seeing a young African American man happy, where we don't have to focus on him being sad or depression among people of color. So I think it's really important to not only use the hashtags, but to use our own stories to just let them know that people of color, we do have our own identities, and not only that, but what we experience is a true story, and we can share that not only through hashtags, but through our own experiences.
Oh, great. Thank you. So I am going to, for questions, I'm just sending a message to the attendees so that they know that they can post their questions. So I'm gonna open it up for our attendees to ask some questions, and then we can share our final thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up. Let me see if I have any questions in the inbox. I don't see any questions just yet, but I did have a question as one of you all were talking. I think it might have been you, Charmaine, about how sometimes people will say, like, I don't see race. What's the harm in that? What damage does that do when somebody says, I don't see race, I'm colorblind?
Me personally, I think it removes themselves from creating a solution for a problem that's active. You can remove yourself from the situation saying that you don't see race, but there's other people around you that do. And when you remove yourself from the problem, you can't become active in the solution. So me personally, I think that when someone says that they don't see race, it's like, how can you not? When certain things may happen and race may be an issue. So I agree with what Vincent said earlier, is that you have to remain woke, because not everything you see on the news may be racially motivated. However, race does play an impact in some of the crimes that are committed, and especially hate crimes in this political climate. So it's really hurtful. It's detrimental to our society, but you have to remain active, because if you remove yourself from a situation, you can't make change from the outside. So I think it's really important as people that we just remain not only active in our community, but if it doesn't personally affect you, someone around you may be affected. So it's just important for us to always see any issue, no matter if we're affected by it or not.
Yes. And for anyone, anyone who says that they don't see race is frankly delusional. It's very clear that Black and Brown students are not attaining academically at the same rate as other races. And I mentioned before various issues related to infant mortality and mortality of African American women and breast cancer and beyond. So all of this has to do with race. Race is the basis of these stats. And to say that one does not see race means that they're not seeing a major part of our reality.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also damaging because it strips people of their identity. Like, my salient identities are my race and gender. I don't see my race. Does that mean you don't see me? And I think that there's a lot of unique aspects of different racial groups. And so to say you don't see race means that you don't see those different unique opportunities or identities. So I agree. I think that it allows people to not be held accountable for a major issue in America. Racism has probably been the most persistent thing in America since its founding. Um, and it doesn't help to work towards a positive solution. So I don't see any questions in the inbox. So what I'm going to do is ask for you all to share just your final thoughts, and if you think it's worth for scholars to apply to NCORE or any of our other GMS sponsored conferences that we take students to.
Well, my final comments would be for GMS scholars or whoever is attending to remain active or become active in their community. You never know the impact that you may have on someone else's life, or you never know what your passion may be by just becoming active in the community. So I would say that is really important. Also, practice self-care, especially within this political climate. That would be really important. Also, if you are a GMS scholar, I would definitely recommend you to apply to any GMS funded events. It not only changed my life because of the people I met and my GMS brothers and sisters, but just being able to be at a conference with like minded people and be able to network and to see the way that other people think about the certain issues that we are now facing in our society. It really changed my life. It was really motivational, and I came back to my community ready to get work done, knowing that I'd seen issues in a different way from just the conversations that I had with the people that I encountered.
I too am very glad to have attended the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity. Um, Being that I live in New York City, at one point I began to think that I had everything at my fingertips here, and it wasn't necessary for me to venture out of my comfort zone that much because everyone comes to New York, right? Well, that couldn't be any further from the truth. I realized that I was kind of in my own little bubble, and when I went to the NCORE conference, I've made some great friends, and I was able to engage with people from different professional backgrounds. I think that it's really easy for me to remain in a fish tank of people who think and talk like me and share the same political views. As mentioned before, I worked at a place where I lived where I worked, and I went to a language school where it was a total immersion language environment. And prior to that, I was in a rural Vermont campus. And while they all provided wonderful, rigorous environments where I grew a lot, I think that there's a whole lot of homogeneity among the people that opt into such environments. So going to the INCORE conference helped me to break out of my bubble and to just form some great friends, some great professional contacts. And I look forward to applying to whatever conference in the future that the Gates Millennium Scholars Program offers, because I have come to see the value of expanding my network and just breaking out of my comfort zone.
Yes, and that is a perfect segue, Vincent, because the APHA applications, the American Public Health Association, we will be taking scholars to that conference, and that application is available July 28th. So if you are in public health, or if you have an interest in going into public health, you can stop by our Facebook page to get more information about where to go to find the applications and how to apply. And also, we take scholars to the Institute on Teaching and Mentoring. And so applications for that conference are going to be available July 21st. So those are two more opportunities that are coming up pretty quickly in terms of like the application process to get connected to some other GATE scholars, to learn more about the field that you might be going into, and really having a meaningful and impactful experience with other scholars in higher education as well as your GATE scholars. So I encourage you all to apply. And then I also want to thank Charmaine and Vincent. You know, I sent out a request to all of the scholars who attended INCORE, and they answered the call. They were ready and willing to participate in this panel. So I thank you all for your time. We are hoping to do more webinars after major conferences so that folks who weren't able to attend can still get some knowledge and information from the conference, even though they weren't able to attend. So I just want to say thank you for Vincent and Charmaine. And for everyone watching, I encourage you all to, continue to have these conversations. I started off the webinar by saying oftentimes race is a touchy topic. We talk about it with our friends or maybe with some of our colleagues at work, but, we don't know how to really have meaningful conversations about race. And the only way to really talk about it is to start the conversation. Be mindful and aware of people's identities. If you trigger someone or offend someone, apologize, but authenticity when it comes to dealing with issues of race and identities is really important. And so just start the conversation in an appropriate way, obviously, but try to have more of these conversations so that we can start to chip away at the major boulder that has been a huge obstacle for progress in America. So thank you all. Any other thoughts or words, Charmaine or Vincent, before I stop the broadcast?
Thank you for having us.
No problem. No problem. You all have a good night. Thanks everybody for joining. And this will be posted on our Facebook page since I'm challenged and wasn't able to do the Facebook Live. But thanks everybody. Have a good night.